Well, welcome back to It's an Inside Job podcast. I'm your host, Jason Lim. Now, this podcast is dedicated to helping you to help yourself and others to become more mentally and emotionally resilient so you can be better at bouncing back from life's inevitable setbacks. Now, on It's an Inside Job, we decode the science and stories of resilience into practical advice, skills, and strategies that you can use to impact your life and those around you. Now, with that said, let's slip into the stream. Well, welcome back, folks. Welcome back to the show and allowing me to be part of your week. You know, if you're a regular listener to the show, one of the common denominators is that change and challenge is inevitable. It shows up on our doorstep whether we invite it or we don't invite it. And when we face change and we make it through that change, we have this wishful thinking that things will go back to normal. And I think one of the major salient learning points from the pandemic is that we don't go back to normal. What happens is that we reset at a new normal, if we can call it that. The question is how do we move into the future? How do we embrace that new change? How can we accept? And how can we come to peace with the idea that life, that the world, that everything around us is in constant flux? My guest today will speak to this and much more and what that means for organizations moving forward and ourselves as individuals moving forward. So in today's episode, I am very privileged to be joined by Dr. Nadya Zhexembayeva. Now, Nadya, she is a renowned scientist, entrepreneur, and author who is widely recognized as the Reinvention Guru. She specializes in resilience and reinvention, helping companies navigate the complexities of a rapidly changing world. She's worked with a number of giant corporations such as Coca-Cola, IBM, and Cisco, guiding them to reinvent their products, their leadership practices, and business models to meet new market demands and prepare for disruptive forces. She's also an author in her latest book, the Chief Reinvention Officer Handbook, How to Thrive in Chaos. Now, in our conversation today, Nadya and I, we delve into the concept of the Chief Reinvention Officer, exploring how leaders can cultivate a mindset that embraces chaos and sees it as an opportunity for growth and innovation. We also discuss strategies for identifying emerging trends, managing diverse talents, and inspiring teams to embrace change, and the crucial role of an effective communication in leading through chaos. Additionally, we explore the key skills and competencies that leaders need to develop to thrive in chaotic and ambiguous situations. So now let's slip into the stream to uncover practical strategies to foster a culture of continuous learning, experimentation, and agility within organizations. Well, I'd like to welcome Nadya to the show today. Nadya, thank you for showing up. I know you're a very busy woman, and I really appreciate your generosity. I was wondering if we could kick off the conversation by you introducing who you are and what you're about.
Thank you, Jason. Happy to be here. I am a recovering academic. My last position in executive education was the Coca-Cola Chaired Professor of Strategy and Sustainability, and I left that position in 2016 to have more hands-on, ear-to-the-ground experience with business. I grew up in the Soviet Union, and when the collapse of the Soviet Union happened, I was surprised to see how fragile our human systems are, and at the same time, how resilient a pocket or two in those human systems end up being in the middle of unthinkable disintegration of the fabric of society. So when I had a chance to start my PhD program 10 years later, no surprise, I chose as a topic large system survival and resilience. And it drove me into research on what makes one person survive an unimaginable horror and actually become stronger, and another person disintegrate with seemingly minor, and I say that in quotations because it's all very relative, situation, and why one company looks at a crisis as an opportunity and another disappears overnight. And of course, at the larger system level, why one community, city, or country end up growing with every tremendous impact, like Second World War for example, or another community gets completely destroyed. So that's been the subject of my life's work, and I applied it in academia as a business owner and also as an executive in the mining field.
And I think that's very interesting. Two people can have the identical same crisis or situation or challenge or uncertainty, and they show up differently. I know you can write a whole book about this, which you have, but maybe we can kick off there. I mean, from your perspective, what makes the difference of how people show up to a situation, where some shrink to that situation and some approach it?
Mm-hmm. So there are a number of things, a number of drivers that make a difference based on the research I have. And of course, you have such a breadth of experience in this area. I really am better suited to discuss large systems than I am a human being as a system. But what I know from neurophysiology and research on trauma, especially early trauma, it's very clear that the earlier the trauma happened, the more impact it has on our ability to handle uncertainty and disruption, and the sensitivity we have and the inner resilience we have. So there are some external drivers that are essentially out of our control. I, for example, was born in an infectious disease hospital, and I was in isolation the first days of my life, and I was not allowed to be touched by my parents or anyone else. You can imagine the kind of trauma that creates. We know that when it was still legal to do research on monkeys, and we saw traumatic, long-lasting brain damage from lack of tactile relationship with the skin. So you can have a very early childhood trauma, and that will create a fabric of your neural system that will predetermine certain responses. My interest, however, is what is without the external factors, what is within our sphere of influence, because I didn't choose to be born behind Iron Curtain. I didn't choose to be born into a family of murdered and tortured generations, and almost everyone in my family comes from the dissident line. So that was not my choice. So my interest was, since I didn't choose that, what can I choose? And what we're learning is that there are practices and habits we can develop that will allow us to relatively fast and relatively quickly increase our capacity to deal with uncertainty. And those start with mindset. So one thing that is definitely driving our response is our perception of what uncertainty is and what change is. So if you look at uncertainty as your enemy, you will have one response. If you look at uncertainty as your norm, you will have a different response. I'll give you an example. Please. When babies are born, they don't have a need for uncertainty. It's not a genetic setup. It's not our factory preset. The baby laying in a crib does not demand a detailed itinerary of how the day will look like, when the feedings will happen, when the change in the diapers will happen, or whatever other certainty you may perceive. It's not our factory preset. We are completely happy with uncertainty when we're young, and we're educated out of it. We were trained to perceive uncertainty as a negative. It's not our factory preset. Same with change. If we had a problem with change at birth, we would never live long lives, because life demands us to adapt and change. We would never sit or walk. And I've never yet seen a healthy baby who demands a bonus or extensive training to start walking. It's just not our factory preset. This is an acquired mindset. So what we've done in tons of experiments, and we are lucky at Reinvention Academy because our mission is 1 billion people with resilience and reinvention skills, so that our civilization is sustainable and capable to deal with the disruptions of this century. We have now touched just over 700,000 people. So we have enough data to say what works. And we can see that exercises that aim not only at tool set and skill set, but also at mindset,
Yes.
can increase the ability to deal with uncertainty in a very short period of time, 5 days, even a few hours, you can see already a high level of resilience and higher readiness and quick reaction to incoming disruption that is not really muddied up by the assumptions that no longer serve us. So yes, biological or environmental predispositions, and good news, quite a lot of it is within our own sphere of control.
And I agree. I know your expertise lies within large systems and corporations and organizations. And at the same time, you also speak you've articulated also sort of at the building block of any organization is the individual human being. So if you have resilient people, you'll have resilient teams, departments, and so on up the food chain. Perhaps we could shift it. You mentioned the Reinvention Academy. Can you speak a little to that? And why do people flock to that? And what skills, to the extent you would like to share, do they pull from it?
Absolutely. So I have to start with the story of Reinvention Academy, and that is a story of failure. It started because of a massive professional failure that I've experienced over a course of about 15 years, just under that. So as I mentioned, I was a professor, and not only I was an academic, I had the luxury of being a rather successful academic. I specialized on large system survival because I started my PhD in August of 2001 at Case Western Reserve University here in US. And that is the university that started my field. The first PhD in organizational behavior was given at Case. The first master's in organizational development was ever created at Case. This is where the field started. And some of my professors were still alive when it started. So it's like you're touching gods right there. So August 2001, I entered the program 2 weeks or so into the program. We're sitting in a closed workshop, and remember, no cell phones, 2001, it's a different world. We're behind closed doors. The workshop, the seminar goes from 8 to 9:30 break, and then it continues after coffee break. So we come out at 9:30 on September 11, 2001, and we understand that something is happening in university because it looks like a ghost town. So we start trying to figure out what's going on, and what's going on is both of the attacks on the Twin Towers already happened, and we missed it. So, of course, the university closed immediately when we stopped the seminar, but a day or two later, my department came together as both academics, the professors and the doctorate students, and our question was, what did we do? How did we contribute to this? What does management and management education create and contributes to conditions for something like this to happen? And therefore, how can we prevent it? So my life was shaped and my research was shaped from that day on. And we started the research in preparation for a conference by the amazing Peter Senge of the Fifth Discipline and the System Thinking. In May 2002, he was planning to have a conference called Spirit in Business. So we flew in on the first flight out of Cleveland a few weeks later because the flights were kind of grounded. We flew into Boston to work with his team on that concept, and we cooked up a research to see, can we imagine business not only being neutral, so not creating conditions for extreme terrorism, poverty, extreme radicalization, or whatever else was driving that event, but also be generative, not just neutral, not a zero impact, but can it be a positive impact? And we started this research project called Business as an Agent of World Benefit, where we wanted to look for companies that are able to do both profitability and world benefit, true, meaningful regenerative capitalism, using the words of John Elkington and other amazing authors who now are driving that conversation. And that determined my work in the field of quotation marks sustainability, because I do not like that word. I believe it's the lowest possible mark we can aim for. I always use that joke that if you meet a friend and you ask them, how's your life, how's your work, how's your marriage? And if the answer is sustainable, it hardly sounds like something you are aspiring to. It's like, how's your marriage sostainable? Ooh, that
sounds like we're existing and not living.
Yes, that we are, barely making it and kind of dreading it. So I don't want to have a sustainable marriage. Neither do I want a sustainable company or sustainable world. I want a thriving world. I want an amazing world, joyful world, loving world, flourishing world, whatever other thing, but it's definitely not sustainable. So I don't like that word, but that's the word that was labeled. And for a long time, I was writing in sustainability, speaking in sustainability, creating concepts that became classics in sustainability. And to this day, are taught in every school in the world. For example, the concept of embedded sustainability. And around 2012, so over a decade later, and I know that because I remember so clearly my daughter was around first or second grade, so she just started school. We were sitting at the conference, after the conference at the dinner table with a few of my close friends, colleagues in the field who were speaking at that conference with me. And one of them said, in very, very direct conversation, said, so do you have hope? Do you have hope? And the answer to that question was quite dire, because at that table, each one of us, one by one, agreed that we passed the moment of prevention, that on the key challenges on which we've been at that point, I was a newbie. I was working on it only 10 years, but there were people there who've been working there all of 90s, some of the 80s, some of them were in the first Rio Earth Summit. Like these are the originals. And all of us agreed that we failed, that this was a story of absolute failure, that none of our books and charts and PowerPoint slides and keynotes made it end. And it was a very sobering experience when you have a kid who is 7 and you are saying this is too late on almost every issue that really matters, not just climate, but water, soil, social sustainability. That would be social fabric of humanity around equality. Access to water drives wars. Access to land and irrigation drives wars, and so many other issues. Just any issue you take, we're late. We're done. We no longer can prevent. All we can do is adapt. That's it. It was a big, big conversation for me and my family, my husband, my team. And we finally, looking at what made the difference, realized that our obsession with sticking it to the man and shaming everyone into submission and giving data that proves that this is real made no difference. If anything, it made things worse. That it's people don't change not because they don't believe our data, because they simply don't know how. The skills of change in the era that was preceding the last 60, 70, 80 years have been so stable and so predictable that most people have completely lost their capacity to change. And if they had it at birth, it was educated out of them. It was something that was pretty much abandoned as early as kindergarten. It's something that would be perceived as disruptive in class. That natural capacity to question, to change, to rebel, to rethink would be crushed nonstop from very early childhood all through their career. And you were taught to remember the right answers and follow the rules and sit still and shut up and raise your hand and all other things that create predictable, efficiency-oriented long-term employee that doesn't move around. So that is the predirection, that is the foundation of Reinvention Academy. The reason I left formal academia and left sustainability in quotations, because I don't believe I ever did. But in the eyes of a lot of my colleagues, this looked like a sellout. But the reason is I have a kid, and my kid will have a horrific century in her hands. She already has. As a descendant of Ukrainians and Kazakhs who died in troves and now dying in the Ukrainian war, she already is engaged in a century that is not kind. I needed her to be ready. I needed her to have skills instantly available wherever she is, whatever profession she is, whatever disruption she's facing, from having a new boss to having a new government, to looking at a new technology such as AI, to something tremendous as Ukraine war or Canadian wildfires, that she is not wasting energy on resistance, on sabotage, on whatever other unconstructive way of dealing with disruption is, and that she's automated, well-polished, highly professional response to professional, I mean, well-done response to a disruption. That's where Reinvention Academy came from.
Thank you
That's
for that.
a very long answer.
No, but I mean, what you say, I mean, I've had a number of, part of the series of this podcast, it focuses on resilience. And I've talked to a number of Ukrainians, from the top economist in the country to soldiers literally in a bunker. As I was talking to them, safe in my Oslo studio, but you could hear the thump, thump, thump of Russian rockets hitting the ground as we were talking. And I've talked to professors and such. And so everything you speak to resonates with me because I'm speaking to these people. And I've worked with some degree of trauma before in my earlier career, before working in the corporation. So everything you say to me is so salient, and it's so grounded and tool-based. And I think it's just that. We've already migrated into this new century, migrated into this new world. However it shows up, it's here. And the question is, do not heat the house with the windows open. What I hear you're saying, Nadya, is to take the energy and to some level, embrace the uncertainty, embrace the struggle, and learn to adapt. How can you take control? I was also speaking to a Holocaust survivor, Max Eisen, earlier in the podcast, and I think season 1, and he talked about, in that death camp, when there's just complete destruction, he had to make a choice. And that choice was for him to constantly figure out how he can have a sphere of influence, even the smallest thing, creating a sense of routine in the crazy chaos of that death camp called Auschwitz and Birkenau. And so, again, a lot of what you say really resonates with me. So you also wrote a book, Chief Reinvention Officer Handbook, How to Thrive in Chaos. Throughout the book, you emphasized collaboration and the power of collective intelligence. You also delve into the importance of diverse and inclusive teams, fostering a culture of, you called it, continuous learning and encouraging experimentation and agility. Now, there's a lot there, but if we unpack it, I mean, of all that, what do you feel is the most important for large organizations to focus on as we move into uncertain times sometimes?
To answer this question, I think we have to look at the data. And as a scientist, I am a bit data obsessed. What do I do as a business owner, as a scientist, as a former executive to make my organization more resilient? I think data gives us very, very clear clues. In the 20th century, the average business model lifetime, the cycle of how long from the beginning of the creation of a stable business model until its destruction, when it's no longer produces value, how long can you milk the same cash cow? And the average was about 75 years. The numbers vary between 62 to 75, but it's really in a many, many decade horizon. In that time, reinvention is something you would need once every 30, 40, 50 years. In that time, you would outsource it to corporate consultants, the McKinseys of our world, and you would never have it in-house. Why would you if you're using it every 50 years? The issue is that we continue to operate as if that is still the case, where today's data is simply shocking. So the first time the cycle shrunk was in 1989, because two things happened in 1989. Number one, globalization, the fall of Berlin Wall, combined with then opening up of China, fall of Soviet Union and Yugoslavia. And we're suddenly not competing with our own neighbor, but we're competing with the world. But that is combined with knowledge openness, because 1989 is the same year when scientists discovered how to make internet widely accessible. And not only we're competing with anyone in the world, the knowledge that used to be a know-how is now democratized, but also capital. Just in the 80s, to find capital, venture capitalism is a couple of decades old. You wouldn't have any access to capital. Crowdfunding, forget about it. That's a decade old, right? So you wouldn't be able to get access to capital. You wouldn't be able to get access to know-how, and you wouldn't be able to get access to market because of high barriers to entry. All of that disappeared in the 90s. And suddenly the life cycle of a business model shrunk from typically 75 years to typically 15 and continues shrinking through the 21st century. We do this research every 2 years, and our 2022 data shows that in 2022, about 20%, approaching 21% of companies were reinventing every year or less. Yes, there are some industries where it's every 4 to 5 years. We have yet seen an industry, including monopolies and long investment cycle, high amortization cycle companies, above 10 years. You can be a monopoly and you are not isolated in the world. You still need to reinvent, just slower, but it's no more than 10. So what is the number one thing you need to do? Stop treating reinvention as a project. Change is no longer a project. It's a continuous process, the way you manage budgets, the way you manage HR processes, and may manage operations. You should generate change the way your operations generates your project, your products, your processes. It should be as polished, as automated, as highly efficient, as done right as any other essential business process you're running today. So it was not surprising for me that this year, the PwC's Global CEO Survey put reinvention as a number one priority for CEOs. They're researching 4,000 plus global CEOs. And number one priority is reinvention in both time that CEOs are dedicated to it and the investments they're putting into it. This is it. We are in the age where reinvention is the strategy.
And so, speaking about that and looking at that, I find it's always easier to speak about it than to actually do. So, how would you, what recommendations or advice would you give to leaders to cultivate a mindset of embracing chaos and see it rather as growth and innovation than something to be afraid of? Mm-hmm. Shift this.
Yeah, so this is, again, not a one-time event. It's a continuous stream of activities. First of all, when you need to reinvent every 12 months or less, unless you put dedicated resources to this task, it won't happen. It no longer can be done as a last thing on Friday afternoon or as a additional task done on your spare time, as it was treated in the past. You do your main job, and then there is this transformation project we all enroll in. Excuse me, when the transformation project is now over 50% of your time, that is the main job. And whatever else you're doing is a sidekick story. So unless you have a dedicated business unit or a function, and we have researched at least 3 different ways to set it up at the organizational design level to make it work. But unless you set up isolated resources that run this full time with right budgets and the right skill set, not going to happen. Second thing is there is a consistency and regularity that is required. Does it need to be every single day? Most of the time, no. But is there a set of activities that needs to happen on a regular basis? Absolutely, yes. So having a monthly reinvention breakfast with your staff where you are pulling together the best portfolio of reinvention initiatives, diversified portfolio from incremental to radical change, from small subsystem focus to ecosystem focus and everything in between, where you are reinventing not just the product, but also processes, platforms, customer experiences, so many directions. We have now researched 15 different directions, 15 ways to reinvent. Unless you do this in a consistent kind of heartbeat situation, there is a beat to your work. This happens on a regular basis. It will not work. So it's very similar as taking a shower. Do I take a shower every minute? No. If I take a shower every hour, my skin will get some sort of disease because it's not very healthy for it. But if I don't take a shower on a regular basis, I begin to stink. And same with our product, services, processes, motivation system, you name it. Everything in business has to be reinvented. The speed, the heartbeat, that is unique for your specific industry, your context, your company, your culture. And we look at a lot of specifics to help with the recommendation on what would work for your company. And there are many different benchmarks you can look at. But it has to be consistent. It cannot be, I take a shower once every 25 years. It will not work, and neither your employees nor your customers would want to stick around because that stinks.
So when you're having these reinvention breakfasts, just to get a little nuts and bolts here, David Eagleman, a neuroscientist from Stanford, he wrote a book on creativity, and he talks about blending ideas, breaking ideas, and bending ideas. And what I hear you saying, Nadya, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is to look at what we're doing traditionally and to break it open, see what the various parts are. Can we blend them with different ideas? Can we warp them? Is this what you're talking about? Is it, maybe brainstorming is the wrong word, but it's these are structured conversations, or are they more open and fluid?
No. You can have more open and fluid from time to time because you need to let out of the steam, and employees are struggling. The latest research published in May 2023 shows that in the last 5 years, the employee average willingness to support change initiatives fell down from 74% on average willing to support to only 43% of employees willing to support. 74 to 43, this is a massive drop. Our employees are overloaded. They have a change fatigue. They're done. They're quiet quitting. So yes, you can have an open conversation to let off steam, but most of the time that's not something that's productive. That's something that needs to be done from time to time to clear out the emotional baggage that is created and create a safe, psychologically safe environment and transparency. So yes, but it's not the meat and potato of what you do. We have now generated a whole library of exercises you can run. You can run Kill the Company exercise, where employees are competing on how easy or hard it is to destroy the company from different angles. And they will themselves generate a whole variety of weaknesses and propose solutions on how to reinvent based on those weaknesses. We have creative exercises using other schools of thoughts, for example, Blue Ocean Strategy Canvas, but we adapted it in a new form to use it as a source of generation of ideas. We use design thinking. We use our own exercises around Titanic syndrome terminology and the theory of Titanic syndrome we developed, and on and on and on. There are many exercises you can do. And yes, it is very structured experience. The issue, however, is do it regularly. It's not a one-time thing. Never be a one-time thing. So yes, you would create conditions in which large number of employees will create this kind of drive. And I'll give you an example. One of our long-term partners, Danfoss, which is in heating and cooling and other industrial equipment manufacturing. Some years ago, they created this 24-hour reinvention format. So on day one, anyone in the company can take a day off and come and pitch an idea for reinvention. And then the whole community votes on the best idea, and some number, 8 to 10 of the best, are selected. And everyone can join any team to work on those projects. Overnight, they develop a project with mentorship and then present it immediately to the board. There's no layers of hierarchy. And the board makes a decision within at the end of those 24 hours at their presentations. That company on the first run was able to get their first idea patented within 100 days. And for this company, and for Danfoss, the typical patent time would be 24 months. So they went from 24 months to patent to 3 months to patent, just because they created regularity and created consistency with different type of exercises you can run to create structured, well-run, safe space that is dedicated for that work, that does not interfere with the main stake responsibility that all employees have. But as I said, we now have a library of exercises you can use that fit your culture, your industry, and so many other dimensions.
In part one, Nadya shared some thought-provoking insights that challenge our perspective on uncertainty and how we can navigate it effectively. So let's recap on some of the key takeaways from the discussion. Now, Nadya emphasized that importance of asking questions, the right questions, particularly when facing uncertainty. She encouraged us to consider what lies within our sphere of influence and what aspects we can truly and actually change. By focusing on what we have control over, we can empower ourselves to take proactive steps forward. We discovered that there are specific practices and habits we can cultivate to enhance our capacity to deal with uncertainty and to develop the right mindset. Nadya highlighted that our response to uncertainty is driven by our perception of it. If we see uncertainty as an enemy, we may feel overwhelmed and fearful. However, if we see it as a norm, an inherent part of life, we can approach it with greater resilience and adaptability. Now, furthermore, Nadya shared insights from the Reinvention Academy, an organization dedicated to teaching individuals resilience and reinvention skills. Their mission is to ensure that our civilization remains sustainable and capable of dealing with the disruptions of this century. Nadya explains that the accelerated pace of change driven by trends like globalization and the accessibility of internet has significantly reduced the lifespan of traditional business models from what was traditionally 75 years down to 15 years, and that rate is continually shrinking. She actually mentioned in 2020, about 21% of companies were reinventing themselves annually. Now, looking ahead in part 2 of this episode, we'll explore the essential skills and the mindset organizations need to embrace for successful reinvention. Nadya will discuss how reinvention should be an integral part of an organization's operations, generating change as naturally and efficiently as any other crucial business process. So now let's slip back into the stream into part 2. How does one push the brilliant idea of reinvention, which is a necessity on an organization that is worn down because of change and they have change fatigue?
Every time my graduates, and we have programs of different kind, and including the professional certification, so certified reinvention professionals of different levels. Mm-hmm. Whenever they ask me, how do you sell reinvention, internally or externally, my answer is you don't. You never sell reinvention. You solve actual problems of actual people in front of you, and the solution speaks louder than any words you use. So I don't sell reinvention. I come in and try to solve the problem in front of me. The problem in front of me, when we're looking at change fatigue, looks very often, not always, but very often, as something that the executive team created by shooting themselves in the foot. And what do I mean by that? This is a multi-step domino effect story, so just bear with me.
Please.
Most of our employees, most of the humankind at this point, are still living in long cycle mindset. They still believe that reinvention is something that should happen every 40 years. They still believe that things will, quotation marks, go back to normal. They believe it since the last economic crisis. By the way, the last economic crisis was 15 years ago. And to this day, I come into executive suite, or I come into water cooler conversation, or I talk to a security guard at the entrance of the headquarters, and they say, when things go back to normal. 15 years they've been repeating when things will get back to normal, because the mindset is that this shit storm, forgive my language, that we're living for years, that this is a temporary event, and if we just buckle up and tighten our belts and wait it out, things will normalize. There's absolutely no data, whether economic disruption level, technological disruption, regulatory disruption, generational changes in the preferences between generation disruption, social disruption, political disruption, you name it, weather disruption. There's zero evidence that things will come back to normal within the century. The Accenture Global Disruption Index shows that in the last 5 years, we had the disruption level that is just unprecedented. So if you think about the years after the economic crisis, 2011 to 2016, they were disrupted years. We were roller coasting, right? It was right after the economic crisis. We still couldn't figure out our footing, pretty uneven years. The global disruption index grew by 4%. We are generally speaking 4% more disrupted, and we faced 4% more disruption than the 5 years before that. In the following years, 2017 to 2022, 4%, then 5 years, we grew 200%. We are not faking it and we're not crazy. We objectively have more crap to deal with. But we're still pretending that this is temporary, that another day, another week, another cycle, and it will go back to normal. So the number one problem that we're facing with change fatigue is we're waiting for something that is not going to come, and we're constantly disappointed and losing our patience and not taking the steps necessary to live differently in the new world because we're refusing to look at facts and refusing to accept reality as it is. When you live in Florida and it's not snowing for 100 years, would you have warm clothes? Would you know how to drive in the cold weather? You live in a cold weather, right now it's warm, but
normally
the north of Europe is not exactly Florida. So you know how to drive in extreme weather conditions. You have warm clothes. You have equipment. The city dedicates money to have clean snow plowers and so on. We are living in the snow conditions for 15 years with every forecast telling us that this ice age is here to stay. And we're pretending that this is a glitch in the system and Florida weather is just around the corner. And we're surprised why our people are getting suffocated. So what happens is when we start a new change initiative, the employees hear in their mindset of long cycles, what they hear, do one more thing, you employees, what's the psychological contract? On the side of employees, you employees, push one more time and things will normalize. That is an unconscious bias, and that is agreement they're entering when they're entering into initiative. Where the reality is, no executive can promise that. So when that psychological contract is silently broken because we cannot deliver on that unconscious promise, we cannot promise that things will normalize. We cannot even promise we'll finish this initiative. Most of the time it will be incomplete. And if it's complete, nobody knows was it successful or not because conditions changed and supply chain reactions changed and inflation changed and currency exchange changed and war changed and regulation changed. And we don't know was it successful or not. We are creating, because of the psychological contract that is completely unexecutable, we're creating a long-term condition where our employees lose trust, lose faith that things can ever get back to normal or they can ever improve, that they're constantly using a new approach to every change as if we've never seen change before. For God's sake, by now we should be professionals at this. And every new change is like we've never done this before. Oh my God, let's create a new big team and big executive committee and let's brand this thing and let's, march on top of it. At this point, we should be looking at this as brushing our teeth. Brushing our teeth should not be a new adventure every time. We should be pretty clear. We're brushing with a toothbrush or with brushing with a pencil or brushing with I don't know what. But we are treating change as this new thing every time, completely wasting resources, never learning our lesson, and creating a psychological contract that is guaranteed to be broken. And the result of that, less trust between executive team and the employees, less readiness and willingness the next year. It's just a downward spiral that keeps going and going.
I think a lot of people this will logically resonate with them. On a rational level, this makes all sense. But, emotionally, we are emotion-based creatures. Obviously, this, Nadya, and we use logic to justify those emotional choices. If we break it down to the individual, if it's something as, let's say, as common as want to quit smoking, logically, person knows they need to quit smoking and they have to make a drastic change. But the only thing that will change behavior is if the logic sinks down to the emotional level, and then that emotional will trigger a behavior of quitting smoking. And I agree with you. There's these unconscious biases, and we have these confirmation biases. One of the hardest things that I ever work with, people talk about communication, collaboration as soft skills, but for me, they are the hardest skills to learn, to be able to be persuasive and influence. And yes, everything you're saying is 100% logical, and it resonates with me. But when people are faced with change is, as you obviously know this, but I'm speaking the obvious, is clearly one of the things that the brain does not like. Negative bias kicks in, that survival mechanism of the wetware of our brains, and it all looks at all the downsides, the hazards, and everything else. My question is, some people, the same situation, they will step up and they will move into the storm. They're not motivated by the storm, but they're motivated moving through the storm to adapt, to evolve, and to survive the situation and thrive. Others will back down. And I think the majority tend to back down unless there is a culture. But let's start with the premise that a company is on the old mentality, the old school mentality that change will come every now and then, that we will go back to normal. How do you persuade on a psychological level for people to move from the emotional side to the logical side of that fence, so logic, emotions, and behavior are aligned? Because for me, a lot of times I see a misalignment.
Mm-hmm. We personally don't persuade, we just go into action. So we develop and test it now with just over 10,000 people, this sequence of exercises that deliver quick low-hanging fruit. So our goal is to bring positive result and positive emotion around change within the shortest period of time. And for us right now, our record is 3 days, but we've seen a lot of results with 5 days, 2 weeks, in a very short period of time, that you have an immediate, tangible, and extremely positive impact of change. So we start rewiring your neural connections and connecting the synapses in a way that will allow you to solidify this new framework in the future. So what we do, and this is a collection of exercises that we now tested, as I said, just over 10,000 people. It happened by accident right after COVID. We were all in a lockdown. We had nothing to do. All consulting contracts froze. So we started with a 2,000 people Reinvention Summit that was held 3 days after America went into lockdown. And then after that, we just repeated the process, polished it in many different countries, communities all over the world, about 46 different countries. So the sequence we developed is a combination of, rational data presented in a more interactive and fun, gaming almost way, and then tons of exercises. So before we go into any rational work, we mandatorily force everyone to do an exercise that is using neuroscience to bridge between the emotional part, because the place where emotions happen have very little connection to the neocortex where rational thinking is happening. So I always use this example. If I'm afraid of flying, you can give me every data in the world that I'm statistically more likely to be killed by a donkey. It makes no difference, because I'm scared, I'm not stupid. I am scared, I'm not stupid. And scared neurologically lives in a different part of our body than stupid does. So you can give me every spreadsheet in the world. And that applies also to the boards. We often get a no from a board and we think it's just we didn't do good enough calculation and we need another 5 or 25 PowerPoint slides to convince them. The bored is not stupid. They're scared. These are two different issues to fix. So don't bring them another piece of data. It will just get them angry. You know this. You know this from your conversation with your spouse. When your spouse is upset and they're scared, don't give them statistics. You will get into a fight. So you know this intuitively. Don't do that at work either. Stop showing your employees another PowerPoint slide of how amazing this new transformation is. It's just going to get them angry because the scared and stupid lives in a different part of our nervous system. So what we do, we have an exercise that allows them to truly go into the scared part and fully unpack that emotional thing, and then build the bridge to the rational. And then we use all kinds of interactive exercises to map out the landscape of possibility and choose the type of activities that you're least likely to get stuck in and have highest level of readiness in the system. So in a sequence of really short set of exercises, bringing them one step closer, one exercise a day, one breakthrough a day, fun, short, interactive, done in a community, you will see a massive change in the organization. I'll just actually give you a statistic because we were just looking at it. And by the way, anyone who is listening, you are welcome to join us to try this out. We hold this sequence of events for free every few months as a public service, as a part of our mission called Easy Reinvention Lab. So if you just Google Easy Reinvention Lab or come to our website, we'll provide links under this episode, learntoreinvent.com.
Definitely include everything in the show notes.
Yeah. So you will be able to test out. We always have the next one available. So we have one coming in August 2023, but then usually it's about a quarter. Once every quarter, there is an Easy Reinvention Lab as our gift to everyone. And we've been looking at the numbers for this, and we were just surprised because we measure the participant experiences throughout the lab and as a long-term impact. And it was just absolutely staggering to see, but I don't know if I have this available here. Something like 90+% have reduced stress in the face of change, and some 80-something% developed a clear idea and an action plan for reinvention. It's really remarkable that it's this combination of mindset, tool set, and skill set. We cannot attack only one thing. I can have the best mindset exercise, and I've changed my mindset, and then I simply don't have tools how to even analyze my options. And then I'm back to square one because I'm annoyed with change altogether. Or I have the tools, but my mindset is not there, or nobody explained me how to use the tools. So I'm like the Ariel in the mermaid story, using the fork to brush my hair. And I'm like, why is this not working? Right? So this all has to work together. And there are plenty of beautiful school of thoughts, which we reference continuously, that also provide pieces of the puzzle that can help, whether it's on strategy side, foresight, design thinking, Scrum Agile, innovation, six thinking hats, appreciative inquiry, change. There's so many beautiful school of thoughts. All of them have a place and all of them can help. It's bridging them and creating a cohesive approach that is consistent and systematic.
And, part of what you said before is like, you don't take the rational approach as the first step. You breach the emotions. What I hear you saying is that you get people to talk about their emotions. You get them to talk about change. You get them to embrace it. And part of what I see is, with trauma work, it's actually getting people to embrace their emotions, not to see emotions as negative or positive, but to see it as information. And what is that information? Yes, sometimes the information is skewed or it's misinformation, but judge it. Because as I think I've talked about this on the episode before, but I mean, there's emotions like fear and anger. They fire off the same neural circuits, the same physiological markers, such as anxiety and excitement. But what changes between these identical physiological markers is the narrative we tell ourselves. And what I hear you, Nadya, through the Reinvention Academy, through your book, through your programs, is that you get people to talk about they're not stupid, as you said. They're just scared. They're skeptical. no human being likes uncertainty, especially when it shows up on our doorstep uninvited. But if we can talk about it, if we can articulate our emotions, and if we can describe it to you, Nadia, or to one of your facilitators,
or to ourselves in the privacy of our home.
Yeah. And a lot of the times it's not telling the other person, it's actually hearing the abstract thoughts and emotions out loud into concrete, tangible words. All of a sudden, they can't morph anymore in our heads. It's there, or we write them down. And having someone of your caliber or your team to help facilitate that allows you can ask the proper questions based on your tool sets and your lessons that you teach people to help them to do that, so they can shift the mindset. But what I also hear is it's complemented by the tool set, because to do the right job, you need the right tools.
Yeah, absolutely. There's an old saying in psychology, name it to tame it. The moment you name the emotion, half of it is no longer gripping you because you are not suppressing it, you are not hiding it, you're aware and conscious of it, and now you can use it as a resource. One of the most important reframes we do during the exercises is to reframe our relationship with the most stigmatized emotions, and especially in the corporate world, fear is a stigmatized emotion. You're supposed to look like you have no fear and you are, on top of the world and all of that. The issue with that is fear is one of the most underappreciated emotions. Biologically speaking, fear is one of the biggest reasons we're still around. And when people don't have fear, we study them quite heavily because that's the way you kill yourself. Because if you don't have fear, you don't have a lot of the protective mechanism. What is fear? Fear is your body, right? The combination of adrenaline, cortisol, and a whole bunch of other things. This is your body that is sensing a potential risk, that is telling you, hey, right now, you and I are going to be a hero. Right now, you and I need to pump blood, get things out of our guts into our muscles, get prepared for a fight because we will survive. Whether we will fly, run away, or fight, or freeze and pretend, we don't care which strategy we'll use, but you and I will survive. This is a heroic response. This is not a cowardly response. And we associate fear with a cowardice, which it cannot be further from the truth, biologically speaking, because fear is the moment we decide that we're going to take action and survive. The challenge comes when we are stuck in fear for a long time. Then we are in a different space, right? So if we stuck in the cycle of fear, producing the same hormones, not for few seconds that is normal for a normal bodily response, but hours, days, weeks, months, or years in advance. But then we're in a different conversation. But our natural biological response called fear, this is our body saying, we're going to be heroes right now. We're going to take action. We're going to focus. We're going to face whatever is coming, and we're going to make it out alive. And I want every one of us to start reframing our emotions. The whole thing of positive and negative emotion, there is no negative emotion. Every emotion is exceptionally functional because our body does not do waste. It would never produce a wasteful combination of hormones that show up as an emotional experience. It has never been inefficient. It's one of the most brilliant engineering creation ever created. And to dare to think that it's a negative thing is just ignorance. So one of the things we do, we of course show a lot of science to explain the chain reaction in our body and why it's happening. So we start appreciating and honoring it and not fighting.
Well, thank you very much, Nadia, for your time. The Reinvention Academy, as you said, it's to thrive in turbulence. It's to shift the mindset. It's to embrace the struggle. It's to see uncertainty not as an enemy, but as something that could lead to learning, growing, developing, and an evolution. Thank you, Nadia, for your time. I was wondering, is there any last advice, any last suggestions as to how people can be better at reinvention?
The last thing is to remember that this is your birthright. Every child, if the child is healthy, is born a reinventor. None of us are born resistant to change. We are reinventing every second by learning how to use our hands, to learn to sit up and crawl, to learn to walk and talk. This is our factory preset. We just educated out of it. So my invitation is not to bring something foreign to you, but to dust off the skills and abilities that are given to you at birth, claim them back, and use them every day the way you used them thousands of times in your early childhood and throughout your life. You are a successful reinventor. You're just not aware of it. So time to claim it and start using it to its best and highest ability.
Thank you very much, Nadya, for your time today and your generosity of sharing your thoughts, your experience, and and obviously your studies. Your research.
Thank you, Jason.
It's made a big difference for me.
Super. Happy to be with all of you guys. Show up at the Easy Reinvention Lab, grab the free copy of our handbook, and happy to see your stories of reinvention and the cases you have to share.
Reinvention, our ability to adapt to change, is something that we all can do. It is something we inherently do when we move from a toddler to a small child, to a teenager, to an adult. Our lives are constantly in flux. Reinvention is about adopting the mindset of seeing uncertainty and change as the norm and not as an enemy to fear. And once we make that shift as individuals, as teams and organizations, we stop to see change as an outlier, but instead we start adopting the idea that change is a norm. It's a normal part of processes of life, of the evolution of ourselves and our organizations. So Nadya, a personal thank you from me to you for spending some of your time with me today to share your experience, your research, and your knowledge about the idea of reinvention and how important that is to start accepting that as a normal process in order for us to adapt and to be able to deal with a number of disruptions that are in our ecosystem. Well, folks, if you are interested in signing up for one of our courses or just getting in contact with Nadya, I will leave all her contact information in the show notes. You will also find a link to her latest book, the Chief Reinvention Officer Handbook, How to Thrive in Chaos. Well, folks, that brings us to a tail end of another episode and another week. If you found this episode enlightening and useful, and you know someone who could benefit from listening to this conversation, please share it with them. And thank you again for allowing me to be part of your week. Well, it's that time again where I need to sign off, and I will see you next time as we continue this conversation. But until then, keep well, keep strong, and we'll speak soon.